In the early hours of the morning, police vans pull up outside red light districts across Indian cities. Doors are forced open, women are gathered, names are recorded, and what happens next is officially called a rescue. But what does it mean to save someone? When the state shows up at your door, or when a police raid interrupts your life? When rescue transforms from an idea to a reality, acting as a mandate rather than a metaphor? In India, sex work exists in a legal gray zone. The selling of sex itself is not illegal, but almost everything around it is. Owning a brothel, soliciting, and third-party involvement. Lying in that gray zone is a grim reality that entire lives are shaped by poverty, violence, gender, caste, migration, and the state's uneven hand. At the center of this moral and political conflict stands Prajwala, an anti-trafficking organization that has rescued tens of thousands of women and children from commercial sexual exploitation. To some, Prajwala is an eternal flame, proof that sex trafficking can be fought, that survivors can rebuild lives, and that abolition is necessary. To others, Prajwala represents something more troubling, a coercive rescue model shaped by global anti-trafficking agendas that conflates sex work with trafficking and removes women's autonomy in the name of protection. Residing in this tension is the underlying line between abolition and agency. How can we differentiate between rescue and choice? How are we to rescue someone between trauma and livelihood? And above all, we have to ask what justice looks like when no option is clean. Founded in 1996 in Hyderabad, Prajwala emerged in the aftermath of a government eviction of women from a red light district called Mehboob Ki Mehndi. When the state cleared the brothels, it offered no plan for the women and children left behind. Prajwala began as a small intervention to stop intergenerational prostitution. It has since grown into one of India's most prominent anti-trafficking organizations, operating across 5 pillars: prevention, rescue, rehabilitation, reintegration, and advocacy. Over nearly 3 decades, Prajwala has been able to report over 28,000 women and children removed from sexual exploitation, over 27,000 individuals rehabilitated, hundreds of traffickers convicted, and millions reached through prevention and awareness campaigns. However, Prajwala stands not just as an organization, but as an argument that sex trafficking is not inevitable, and that prostitution is not simply labor, and that the conditions producing choice are themselves violent. At the heart of Prajwala is its founder, Sunita Krishnan. At 15 years old, Krishnan was gang raped by 8 men. She has spoken publicly about how the physical violence wasn't the most enduring trauma. Rather, what lingered was social indifference and suspicion, specifically the demand that she should behave like a proper victim, one who was ashamed, silent, broken. But she refused to comply. Krishnan went on to study environmental science, then medical and psychiatric social work. In 1996, at just 24, she co-founded Prajwala in Hyderabad following a government eviction that displaced women from a red light district without offering housing, income, or protection. What began as a small intervention grew into one of the most influential anti-trafficking organizations in the country. Over nearly 3 decades, Krishnan has helped shape shelter standards, survivor-centered rehabilitation protocols, and state-level anti-trafficking policies across India. She has spearheaded public campaigns that target buyers, traffickers, and social complicit, arguing that sexual exploitation persists not because of individual failure, but because demand is protected and normalized. Krishnan is also honored as a recipient of the Padma Shri Award, which is a 4th highest civilian award in India. But Krishnan is not a reformist. She is what she calls a steadfast abolitionist. She does not believe sex work can be a profession. She describes it as the oldest form of patriarchal legitimization, the commodification of women's bodies under the guise of choice. For her, prostitution is inseparable from violence, inequality, and structural coercion. From this position, rescue is not moral paternalism, it is obligation. Krishnan argues that rehabilitation cannot be rushed. Trauma care, detoxification, and the slow rebuilding of dignity after years of sexual violence takes time, often years. From this perspective, resistance to shelters, escape attempts, and even returns to sex work are not symptoms of failure. They are symptoms of coercion, trauma bonding, and what she sees as survival conditioned by abuse. This is the moral center of Prajwala's work, and also the source of its greatest controversy. Lakshmi Priya was brought to Hyderabad by her husband's sister and sold into a red light district. Her daughter was taken from her as leverage. Her obedience ensured safety. Nazia became her family's breadwinner as a teenager after her father died. A trafficker promised better wages in the city. She was forced to serve up to 20 men a day. Siraj was told she would receive tailoring training. Instead, she woke up in a brothel 1,000 miles from home. She tried to die with a razor blade. Police found her hours later. Today, Siraj works at Prajwala as a bookbinder, earning a stable wage. These stories complicate the idea of choice, but they also complicate rescue, because not every woman at Prajwala may want to stay. Anthropologists and sex rights workers advocates raise a difficult question. What happens when protection becomes coercion? Vibhuti Ramachandran, an associate professor and anthropologist, argues that sex industry is often treated as morally exceptional in ways other exploitative labor is not. Professions such as factory work, domestic labor, and construction are not first choices, yet they are all shaped by poverty, a factor that sex workers are not exempt from, and the thing that constitutes the main reason why women enter the sex work trade. So why is sex work uniquely framed as something women should be saved from? Ramachandran points to the influence of U.S. anti-trafficking policy in the early 2000s, particularly during the Bush administration. During this time, large sums of funding became tied to abolitionist frameworks. She argued the result was uneven enforcement, substandard shelters, and the removal of women's most viable income sources without meaningful alternatives. In practice, brothel raids often presume trafficking automatically. Women are placed in shelters they cannot easily leave, entangled in slow court systems and bureaucratic release processes. From this perspective, rescue could feel less like liberation and more like incarceration. The uncomfortable truth is that both sides are right about different things. While trafficking is real and violence is endemic and consent under coercion is not consent, the fact is that agency and livelihood also matter. The ability to say no to rescue must count for something, especially when survival is at stake. Prajwala acknowledges that around 15% of women return to sex work. Krishnan attributes this to trauma bonding, Stockholm syndrome, and lack of alternatives. Critics attribute it to structural failures in rehabilitation. However, neither explanation is sufficient alone, because the question is not whether sex work is good or bad. The question is whether a society that offers so few dignified options can meaningfully talk about choice at all. Where Prajwala's work becomes the hardest to dismiss is not in rescue statistics, but in what happens before trafficking begins. Alongside raise and rehabilitation, Prajwala runs large-scale prevention programs aimed at interrupting the pipeline into exploitation. These include school readiness and retention programs for children of women in prostitution, vocational training for adolescent girls in high-risk communities, and long-term residential education initiatives designed to prevent intergenerational entry into the sex trade. According to Prajwala's own reporting, thousands of children who would otherwise have been absorbed into red light districts have instead remained in school. Entire cohorts of girls identified as high risk have been diverted into wage labor before traffickers ever reach them. Prajwala also targets demand. Demand reduction programs from Prajwala focus explicitly on buyers by reframing trafficking not as a problem of women's vulnerability, but of men's entitlement. Their objective is to engage with male buyers of paid sex and provide them three-tiered counseling for behavior modification. This is a unique intervention that was started in collaboration with Hyderabad City Police. Located at Gopalpuram Police Station, this intervention is referred as a Vikalpa and provides intensive counseling to sex buyers apprehended by the police. The buyers are spotted when they come to solicit paid sex on the streets. The male counselors posted in this unit provide professional counseling, followed by counseling sessions by the family and faith leaders. In spite of initial hostility and resistance, the impact of this intervention is very high, indicated by low rates of recidivism. Up until 2025, 2,421 sex buyers have been provided counseling and the feedback has been positive. The areas around this intervention covering the Hyderabad city center have lower incidence of street prostitution. This shift matters. It moves responsibility away from individual survival strategies and towards the social structures that make exploitation profitable. These interventions challenge the system upstream before rescue becomes necessary. In this sense, Prajwala is not only reacting to trafficking, but confronting structural violence itself: poverty, gender inequality, migration, and social abandonment. Even critics of raid and rescue models agree on this point. The problem is not that Prajwala asks women to leave prostitution. The problem is that society offers them so little else. Prajwala means eternal flame, an idea that refuses to accept sexual exploitation as normal, an insistence that dignity is not negotiable, and a belief that survival should not require self-erasure. In a world shaped by inequality, even interventions sometimes may carry violence. However, the hardest political question is not about choosing sides, but about refusing to look away.